I think he had some very subtle messages he wanted to convey to not the people of that time, but to the people of our time.
And it allows us to have an image of Christ.
The refectory falls silent. A long table. One frozen instant. 12 faces trapped. Inside a painting that has remained still for 5 centuries. Look closely at the hands. At the robes. At what each expression is really revealing. Scientists have scanned every inch of it. Restorers have mapped each layer of pigment. Historians have spent decades tracing who is who. Some researchers believe a hidden code is built into the composition. Others argue that centuries of decay and repeated restoration created the forms people think they notice. By the time you finish watching, you will understand which explanation holds up and why. But here is the detail that changes how you see it. Leonardo was not simply capturing a religious scene. Hidden inside the angles, the walls, and the silence of that painted room. Maybe his most guarded secret. What was he truly trying to leave behind? The room, the Duke, and the mission. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Last Supper on the wall of a dining hall in Milan, the refectory of the Dominican convent of Santa Maria del Grazie. Duke Ludovico Sforza ordered the work between 1495 and 1498. The Duke wanted an image that would honor both the church and the prestige of his court. The refectory was a public space where monks gathered daily and visitors passed through, witnessing the combined presence of the Duke and the church at the same time. The subject matched the setting perfectly. The Last Supper portrays a shared meal, and a major turning point in the Christian story, perfectly suited for a room built around communal dining. Leonardo arranged the painted scene so that the table inside the mural aligned with the real dining table in the room. That choice made the image feel part of everyday life rather than something distant on a far wall. The wall panel measures roughly 4.6 by 8.8 meters. Across from it hangs a smaller work, a crucifixion by Giovanni Donato da Montorfano. Above the mural, architectural details connect the work to the chapel and to the Sforza family. The placement kept the painting inside a space where prayer, political power, and communal life blended together without separation. Leonardo placed Jesus at the center and arranged the 11 companions in 4 distinct groups of 3. Each group shows its own physical response to the same moment. Hands, heads, and bodies create contained scenes within the larger image. Light from the windows behind Jesus illuminates the central figure and pushes the gestures outward. The architect Donato Bramante was active in Milan during the same years, and the ducal court funded music, sculpture, and new construction at the same time. Leonardo's presence at Santa Maria del Grazie placed him within a circle reshaping the city in the final decade of the 15th century. The method Leonardo selected was not the traditional wet plaster fresco. He worked on a dry, sealed wall using mixed media, layers applied gradually over time. That approach gave him the freedom to blend skin tones slowly, rework faces and gestures as his ideas evolved, and achieve a level of control over fine expression that wet plaster could never provide. Records show he worked carefully, testing poses and refining. Hands, art, faith, and the public image of a ruling family were tied together inside a single wall. But here is the complication beneath all of that. The very method that gave the Last Supper its beauty, that layered, reworkable surface with its soft light and fine detail, was also the decision that placed it in danger from the beginning. The most beautiful part of the painting was also the most delicate. How long could something built that way really survive? How Leonardo painted it, and what time did to it. Leonardo created his image using oil and tempera together, layering paint slowly on a sealed, dry wall. The technique allowed him to blend skin tones with precision and move through subtle shifts of light and shadow that a true fresco would never allow. He could soften a face, adjust a gesture, or rethink a hand position at any stage. That same method caused problems almost immediately, because the paint rested on the wall's surface rather than bonding into fresh plaster. Moisture and salt slowly worked their way outward and lifted it from below. Smoke, dust, and humidity gathered. Across centuries, repairs added heavy overpaint and thick varnish that gradually covered what Leonardo had originally placed there. Early restorers in the 16th and 17th centuries repaired losses and filled damaged sections without tools to separate original work from later editions. In the 18th and 19th centuries, copyists circulated images that reflected the paintings, built up repairs, and some modified gestures to match local preferences, making it more difficult to trace Leonardo's original intentions. The 20th century brought fresh damage, bomb strikes during the Second World War, sandbags stacked to protect the artworks, and a doorway cut into the lower wall at an earlier stage that removed part of the painting's bottom edge and forced additional repairs. A major modern restoration began under the direction of Pin Brambilla, Barcelona. The team worked from 1978 to 1999, more than 2 decades of detailed effort. Using precise instruments and targeted solvents, they removed layers of overpaint and gradually revealed original pigment where it had survived. Scientific tools guided every stage. Infrared reflectography exposed underdrawings and revealed where Leonardo had changed his mind. X-ray imaging identified denser pigments and later fillings. Ultraviolet light traced varnish applications. Chemical analysis separated original pigments from materials added in later centuries. These methods allowed the team to distinguish original brushstrokes from later additions with a level of precision earlier restorers had never possessed. The restoration was not without controversy. Some critics argued the team removed too much in certain areas, while others praised the scientific discipline. After the project ended, climate control was installed in the refectory to reduce humidity shifts, and access was limited to small groups. Infrared images also revealed pentimenti, drawn revisions, where heads and arms had been moved from their original positions, confirming that the composition evolved throughout the working process. The painting visible today carries both Leonardo's marks and 5 centuries of change layered over them. Scientific study can separate some of those layers, but beneath the physical history lies a question that has nothing to do with pigment. Who are these figures gathered around the table, and why did Leonardo arrange them exactly as he did? Names of those at the table. The painting places Jesus at the center with 12 figures arranged around him. Moving left to right, Bartholomew, James the Lesser, and Andrew form the leftmost group. The next includes Judas Iscariot, Simon Peter, and John. Jesus sits beneath a bright window at the center. To his right stand Thomas, James the Greater, and Philip. The far right group includes Matthew, Jude Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot. Bartholomew stands near the table's edge, body turned toward the center. James the Lesser sits with a tense, wide-eyed expression. Andrew leans back with both hands raised. These 3 appear as startled witnesses, people whose first reaction is physical withdrawal. Judas Iscariot occupies the next group in shadow, leaning away and holding what several interpretations identify as a small purse. Peter leans forward sharply, a small knife visible in his right hand. Between them, John appears with a smooth, youthful face and long hair. Leonardo consistently painted young male figures with soft features in his other works. That artistic habit explains John's appearance here. Jesus sits motionless at the center. The window behind him casts light that frames his head and hands, positioned near the bread and a cup on the table. His stillness makes him the visual anchor from which everything spreads outward. On his right, Thomas raises one finger as if pressing an argument. James the Greater covers his mouth with both hands. Philip leans forward with open palms. These 3 express disbelief mixed with an urgent need for answers. At the far right, Matthew turns toward Jude Thaddeus as though speaking to him. Jude looks toward Jesus with a heavy brow. Simon the Zealot strokes his beard and listens, a conversation beginning at the far end of the room and being pulled toward the center. Leonardo organized all 12 into 4 trios, each functioning as a small scene contributing rhythm to the whole. The movement of heads and hands creates directional lines that guide attention around the table. Identifying the figures with confidence requires multiple sources: hand positions, gaze directions, gestures matching gospel passages, and comparison with workshop copies. Painters within Leonardo's immediate circle, the Leonardeschi, include Giampietrino, Andrea Solario, and Marco Diagiono. Their copies preserve poses and faces that help scholars determine which elements originated with Leonardo. One widely studied copy, the Tongerlo Last Supper, reproduces many of the same poses in close detail. The soft treatment of John's face draws particular attention. Leonardo applied gentle features to young male figures consistently, which explains the difference between John and Peter or Judas on either side. Every name on the wall connects a painted pose to gospel tradition and to the record of workshop copies. That combination gives scholars the foundation they need. But one figure refused to stay settled, and the conversation it sparked reached far outside art history. The claim that would not quit a theory emerged that drew more attention than any other. Certain writers proposed that the figure to Jesus' right was not John but Mary Magdalene. The claim gained enormous traction after Dan Brown placed it at the center of a novel that sold tens of millions of copies worldwide. The book named the figure Mary, built a narrative around hidden bloodlines and suppressed family histories, and sent a generation of readers back to the painting with entirely new questions. Art historians responded with documented facts. They pointed to Leonardo's established practice of painting young men with soft, delicate features, a stylistic pattern present across his other major works rooted in artistic tradition, not ambiguity. The face near Jesus, compared to Leonardo's other work and to workshop copies, shows characteristics consistent with John as Leonardo depicted young male disciples. Conservation work added further weight. The painting has lost substantial original surface, and details visible today often exist only within later repaints. A detail surviving only in a post-Leonardo repair cannot serve as evidence of his intent. The underdrawing from infrared imaging and the scientific photography from the 1978 to 1999 restoration provide a more reliable basis than the surface visible to the naked eye. From those primary sources, the evidence consistently supports John. The novel and the films it inspired kept the theory alive in constant circulation. Tourists arrived at Santa Maria del Grazie searching for proof of a story they had already accepted. Television programs and online videos used pattern matching to connect the figure to Mary, presenting small similarities in face shape or posture as convincing evidence. Scholars identified 3 reasons the identification fails. Leonardo used stylized soft features for certain apostles as a deliberate artistic choice. Workshop copies consistently identify the figure as John, and imaging science reveals underdrawing consistent with a male disciple. Taken together, these 3 lines of evidence greatly reduce the plausibility of the alternative interpretation. The debate revealed something important about how people engage with this painting. 2 completely different modes of interpretation came into conflict, one relying on laboratory results and conservation records, the other on visual pattern matching and a compelling narrative. The gap between a literary thriller and a documented art historical argument proved large enough for an entire popular mythology to build itself inside. The Mary Magdalene theory grew from a quiet whisper into a global cultural story. The evidence supports John. But even if those records appeared to settle the matter, a new generation of tools was about to ask the question again, from a direction no previous method had reached. What I actually found this time? A research team fed high-resolution photographs, infrared reflectograms, multispectral scans, and X-ray maps into a machine learning system. The software studied face shapes, hand positions, brushstroke patterns, and light behavior, then compared those patterns against hundreds of works by Leonardo and his circle. It mapped recurring lines on the Milan wall, identified underdrawing matches, and traced corresponding shapes in studio copies. 3 distinct markers stood above all others. The first was a shift in the jawline of the figure to Jesus' right. Infrared underdrawing reveals a curved line near the ear. The surface paint sits slightly forward from that curve. The program matched that curved line to similar shapes in a Giampietrino copy and in the Tongerlo panel, and the match appears in original paint layers, not only in later repaints. This is not an artifact of restoration. It is something Leonardo drew, then repositioned. The second marker was a hand position near Judas. The underdrawing shows a compact grip low at the table's edge. The surface paint reveals longer fingers. The program found those longer fingers repeated in 4 separate Leonardeschi works, linking the gesture to a deliberate revision that Leonardo's workshop later incorporated into their copies. The third marker was a faint draft line behind Jesus. In visible light it appears as shadow. Infrared reveals it as a clear preliminary stroke that curves in a faint arc echoed in a Solario copy, framing the area where window light narrows behind the central figure. The three markers, the jaw shift, the revised hand, and the draft arc, align along a single visual line running from the disciple's jaw, through Jesus, and down to the hand near Judas. The program tracked where Leonardo drew that axis, reconsidered it, and redrew it. The jawline shifted. The hand changed. The arc was adjusted. Those decisions are recorded simultaneously in underdrawing and in original pigment tests from the modern restoration. The pattern moves with clear intention along the table. The program also ran facial geometry measurements, brow angle, jaw slope, cheekbone structure, against a portrait database from the late 15th century. The disciples match male templates Leonardo applied to young followers in other paintings. A hairline curve at one jaw matched several workshop copies with softer facial treatment, and the program flagged that mixed signal as evidence of deliberate ambiguity rather than error. Leonardo built that softness intentionally. Cross-referencing against the pigment maps from the 1978 to 1999 restoration confirmed the findings. Where testing revealed original pigment beneath later repaints, the jaw shift and draft arc were both present in the original layers. Where a detail existed only in later paint, the program logged it as secondary. The analysis treated underdrawing and original pigment as the primary record. The combined result reads like a message built into layers. Leonardo drew a male face, then shifted that line. He changed a hand and placed an arc behind the central figure. His studio carried those changes into their copies. Later restorations filled the losses, but the original strokes and their workshop echoes remain visible to the right tools. The machine connected them across layers and traced a single coherent visual line, connecting the disciple to Jesus and to Judas through placement and repeated gesture, suggesting a deliberate design in which pose and touch guide the viewer's eye along a planned route through the scene. That axis existed from the beginning, embedded in the planning stage before the surface paint was ever applied. The painting visible today is a layered object, Leonardo's own hand, centuries of restoration, and workshop echoes all compressed into a single surface. Artificial intelligence can identify shapes and trace patterns across that surface. But the final answer depends on underdrawings, pigment maps, and the judgment of trained experts working directly with those materials. That is where the painting's true history survives. For more stories like this one, click through to our next video. Like, comment, and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.